This is Aldgate High Street, and geographically it is here that the East End of London gives way to the City of London. This dragon marks the boundary between the two, and from a policing perspective is significant, as it is here that the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police ends and that of the City of London Police begins. All but one of the Whitechapel murders occurred on Metropolitan Police territory. The one that didn't was that of Catherine Eddowes, murdered on the 30th of September 1888 in nearby Mitre Square. But the events leading up to her death began on Aldgate High Street on the evening of the 29th of September. At around 8:30 that night, Police Constable Louis Robinson of the City of London Police was walking his beat along the High Street when he noticed a crowd gathered on one of the pavements, laughing at something. Pushing through them, he found that the source of their amusement was a drunken woman, whom he later identified as Catherine Eddowes, who was entertaining the crowd with an imitation of a fire engine. Having taken a bow, she lay down on the pavement and went to sleep. Constable Robinson asked if any of the onlookers knew who the woman was. None of them did, so the officer hauled her to her feet and propped her up against the shutters of one of the shops. She promptly slid back down onto the pavement. Robinson summoned the assistance of a colleague, Constable George Simmons, and together they manhandled her round to Bishopsgate Police Station. Here, when asked her name, Kate replied, "Nothing." The officers placed her in a cell and left her to sober up. At 9:45 that night, the city jailer, George Hutt, came on duty and took over responsibility for the prisoners in the cells. He checked on her several times over the next few hours, and each time found that she was fast asleep. By 12:15 on the morning of the 30th of September, she had woken, and Hutt heard her singing softly. A quarter of an hour later, she called to him and asked when she would be allowed to leave. "When you can take care of yourself," Hutt called back. "I can do that now," came her reply. At 12:55 a.m. he brought her from the cell and told her that she could go. He pushed open the swing door to the passage and said, "This way, missus." As she walked to the outer door, she asked him what the time was. "Too late for you to get any more drink," observed Hutt. "I shall get a damn fine hiding when I get home," she sighed. Hutt was not in the least bit sympathetic. "And serve you right," he replied. "You have no right to get drunk." Hutt escorted her to the station's side door, which exited onto the dark and narrow Rose Alley, which still exists today alongside the modern Bishopsgate Police Station. As Kate left the station, Hutt asked her to shut the door behind her. "All right," she chirped. "Good night, old cock." So saying, she made her way along Rose Alley and turned along Bishopsgate, heading in the direction of Houndsditch. She would be dead within the hour. Hutt later estimated that it would have taken her around 8 minutes ordinary walking to reach Mitre Square. The tragedy of Catherine Eddowes is that she was found drunk on City of London Police territory. Had she been a few yards to the east of Aldgate High Street, just beyond the traffic lights, she would have been on Whitechapel High Street and within the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police. The two forces had different ways of dealing with drunks. The policy of the City of London Police was to lock anyone up found drunk in their area, wait for them to sober up, and then release them, as happened in Catherine's case. Conversely, the Metropolitan Police would hold them overnight, and they would appear in court the next morning. Had Catherine been found drunk on the other side of the traffic lights, she would have faced a court appearance and a fine, but she would have survived the night. Mitre Square lay just inside the City of London's eastern fringe. It has changed an awful lot since 1888. Indeed, it has changed an awful lot in the last 10 years. Until a few years ago, it was surrounded by modern office blocks, which, although not particularly special, did at least give it a certain atmosphere. The fact that it was a cobbled square added to the ambience. A raised flower bed stood in the southwest corner, marking the approximate site of the murder of Catherine Eddowes, and provided an unintentional memorial to her. There are and were 3 exits from the square. A fairly wide one onto Mitre Street to the west, a narrow one in the northeast corner, and St. James's Passage, or Church Passage as it then was, in its southeast corner. The recent development has robbed the square of its former sinister ambience, albeit I have to admit that it is a far more pleasant spot than it used to be. The flower bed may have disappeared from its southwest corner, but a lot more greenery has appeared in the square. It has also lost its name, and there is no sign here anymore to tell you that you're in Mitre Square. However, it is unique among the murder sites in that it is the only one at which there is any official recognition of the crime having taken place here, with this information board providing details about the murder of Catherine Eddowes. In 1888, 3 imposing warehouse buildings towered over the square. There were also 3 uninhabited houses, with 2 further houses, one of which was lived in by City of London policeman Richard Pearce, nestled between the warehouses. The warehouse that dominated the north side of the square was the premises of Keely and Tong, and here retired police officer George Morris was working as a night watchman.
At 1:30 on the morning of the 30th of September, City Police Constable Edward Watkins walked through the square on his beat.
He had his lantern on and fixed to his belt. He was emphatic that the square had been quite deserted at that time, and that no one could have been hiding there without him seeing them.
Around 5 minutes later, commercial traveller Joseph Lavender, butcher Joseph Hyam Levy, and furniture dealer Harry Harris, members of the Imperial Club, a club for local businessmen located on Duke Street, now called Duke's Place, left the club and headed in the direction of Church Passage, the southeastern entrance to Mitre Square.
As they passed the passage, they saw a man and a woman standing under the gas lamp over the entrance. The woman had her back to the trio, so they didn't see her face, but Joseph Lavender later identified Catherine Eddowes' clothing as that was worn by the woman. Levy wasn't impressed at the sight of the couple and said to Harris, "Here, I'm off. I don't like the look of those people over there. I don't like going home by myself at this hour of the morning. I don't like passing this class of person." Joseph Lavender, however, was a little less disgusted and glanced briefly at the man as he passed the couple. Despite later claiming that he wouldn't be able to identify the man were he to be confronted with him again, he was later able to provide quite a detailed description of him. He had, he said, the appearance of a sailor, was aged about 30, around 5'9" tall, of medium build with a fair complexion and a small, fair moustache. He sported a reddish handkerchief tied in a knot, wore a pepper and salt loose-fitting jacket, and had on a grey peaked cloth cap. The 3 men continued on their way, and none of them looked back once they had passed the couple. The couple had gone from the spot when, 5 minutes later, City Constable James Harvey walked his beat past Church Passage. He even went down the passage, checking the doors of the premises on either side, but saw nothing. However, he stopped short of entering Mitre Square, but walked back down the passage and continued on his beat along Duke Street.
At 1:44 a.m., just a few minutes after Harvey had completed his examination of Church Passage, Constable Watkins turned out of Leadenhall Street, headed along Mitre Street, and veered right into Mitre Square.
Shining his bullseye lamp into the dark recesses of the square, he noticed something in the southwest corner. Approaching, he shone his lamp onto it and saw to his horror that it was the mutilated body of a woman. Recoiling in shock, he raced across the cobbles and burst into Keely and Tong's warehouse to alert George Morris. "For God's sake, mate," he stammered, "come to my assistance. Here is another woman cut to pieces." Pausing momentarily to get his lamp, Morris followed the officer back across the square, took one look at the body, and raced off along Mitre Street, blowing furiously on his whistle to raise the alarm. Police officers were soon converging on Mitre Square from all directions, and they began fanning out into the surrounding streets in search of the killer. But their efforts proved fruitless. The murderer, it seemed, had melted into thin air, and nobody had seen a thing. George Morris confessed himself totally baffled as to how such a brutal crime could have been committed so close to his place of work without him hearing a sound. He could hear the footsteps of the policeman as he passed on his beat every quarter of an hour, the Illustrated Police News reported. It was only the other night that he remarked to some policeman that he wished the butcher would come round Mitre Square and he would give him a doing. Yet the butcher had come, and he was perfectly ignorant of it.